we're fascinated by Nicolas Cage. We're fascinated by how unusual he is. What lured you to the Nicolas Cage profile?
Well, I'm sure a lot of the same things that you're fascinated with, and I think anybody with half a brain should be fascinated with Nicolas Cage. So, but for me, I mean, it's just there are very few very famous actors or celebrities, period, who I think you can point to and say they're trying to do truly unique creative work. And I think Nicolas Cage is sort of the purest and best example of someone who fits that bill. I mean, he's in just about every kind of movie, from sort of very mainstream Hollywood movies to pretty far out of the mainstream indie films. And sort of no matter what he's doing, he's always going to bring something totally unique and singular and intense to it in a way that I think is pretty different and beyond what other actors of his stature are doing. So there's that side of it, which is kind of the creative side. And then also, I was just fascinated with him personally because it seems like that kind of singularity or eccentricity that he brings to his work manifests itself in his life also. You know, so you would hear these rumors like, oh, he had castles or he had Cobras or, whatever they were. And I'd always wanted the opportunity to get in a room with him and talk about all that stuff.
Well, does he? Does he have castles and Cobras?
Well, he had castles. My understanding is that he had a couple castles. And then he had some financial issues, and I think he's since sold the castles. But I know for certain that he had a couple pet king cobras that he's since gotten rid of. I can't remember if this made it into the final piece, but he told me that when his neighbors realized that he had pet cobras, they weren't that happy about it, and he had to have them rehomed in a zoo, I think.
All right, can you tell us like the 5 strangest things you unearthed upon the reporting of this story?
Sure. Yeah, I would also say I don't necessarily want to suggest that he's like a weirdo or anything.
Oh no, we'll do that. We'll do that. You don't need
We've
to
done that.
You don't need to do any of that. You are profiling him as an artist and a person who is wonderful because he's taking real chances. But we just find the collecting of dinosaur stuff. Like we find the search for the actual Holy Grail. What's he doing?
Yeah. Well, I think he's. So there was a period, it seems, where he was very interested in trying to find the Holy Grail or pursue sort of leads as to where the Holy Grail may have been. And he alluded in our interview to buying properties in England and then also in the United States that sort of aligned with that Grail quest. So that for me was probably the most unusual thing he said. But then even outside of his personal life, in his films, just the sort of strange and eccentric decisions he'll make. You know, he said, for example, that in Raising Arizona, the Coen Brothers movie, that he sort of took inspiration from Woody Woodpecker for his performance in that. Or that in Peggy Sue Got Married, which he made with his uncle Francis Ford Coppola, he was basically doing a vocal impression of Gumby throughout the whole movie. Or maybe it was Pokey. I can't remember if it was Gumby or Pokey. But it's stuff like that.
But you want to make sure we know he's not crazy, right?
So that we know he's not crazy. No, he's not crazy. I think the great thing about him and the inspiring thing about him is that how many of us would want to just like pursue our strangest and most unique impulses, but we don't do it because we're afraid or we think somebody will say no or, we don't have the means to do it. But here's a guy who, as far as I can tell, actually takes those chances, like you said, and pursues the stuff that he feels passionate about. And I wish we could all do that, but we don't. But it seems like he does, and that's what I love about him.
Do you know why he's wandering the earth from karaoke bar to karaoke bar singing Purple Rain?
Well, he did that a couple times, and he didn't go into specifics about it, but my sense was that it was sort of a cathartic, emotional thing he was doing in the fallout from this very brief engagement he had earlier this year. I think, somebody should double check this, but I think he was married for just a couple days. He'd gotten married in Las Vegas where he lives.
Well, did you ask him about, like, he's got that habit. He falls hard and and make some questionable decisions in marriage. Did you ask him about his relationships?
Well, the one in particular, the most recent one that was very short-lived, he said explicitly that he couldn't go into it. I think there might be legal reasons for that. I'm not certain. But I did ask him if there is any relationship between the things that make him so good as an artist, sort of the willingness to be emotionally out on the edge or to take risks, if those things are also maybe things that could make it hard to be in a relationship with him. And he said he did think that was the case and that he wasn't necessarily the easiest person to be in a relationship with. But beyond that, he didn't really get into any specifics about his past marriages. And I wasn't super interested in that myself.
What was the nature of his his money issues?
Well, it's a little hard to know for certain. He says that he had a lot of money in real estate, and then when the market crashed about 10 years ago, it kind of wiped him out. I know there have been lawsuits, I think, with a former business manager who was maybe up to some shady stuff. I'm not totally certain on the specifics of that, but his reasoning is that it was the real estate implosion of about 10 years ago.
20 movies in 2 years, that's not because he loves to work, right? He needs to work.
Well, this is one of the great riddles of Nicolas Cage, and I asked him this also, and he sort of caught to the fact that financial considerations are a part of why he works as much as he does. But the reason that he wanted to explore about why he's working so much now is because he thinks it makes him a better actor, just exercising his instrument all the time. Now, I don't know if that's sort of a self-serving answer that maybe he gave because he didn't want to address whatever financial difficulties he may or may not have had more directly, but that was the answer he gave.
How self-aware is Nicolas Cage?
I think he's extremely self-aware. I think he's very aware of how he's portrayed on the internet, especially the way that moments from his films will be sort of taken out of context and made into memes on social media. I think he knows that people think he's kind of a wild man or goes over the top often in his performances. So I think he's aware of that stuff. But I think one of the things that's most endearing about him and most appealing about him is that he does seem sort of earnest and guileless when he's talking about his enthusiasm. So when he was talking about the fact that he was interested in perhaps finding the Holy Grail at one point, he did talk about it and talk about it in an earnest and interesting way. So I think he's self-aware, but I think not to a degree that prevents him from saying things that maybe a more self-aware person might shy away from in an interview.
Your reaction was what when he said, quote, "The dinosaur skull was an unfortunate thing because I did spend $276,000 on that." A $267,000 dinosaur skull that he bought, I guess, illegally, or he didn't mean to buy it illegally, but it had been acquired illegally from where? Mongolia?
I think that's right, from Mongolia. He had bought it, I think, from an auction house, and then later it came out that it had been acquired illegally, so he had to return it. And of course, he said in the interview he didn't get his money back, which was kind of a drag. But I guess that's one of the risks that you incur perhaps when you buy a $276,000 dinosaur skeleton. But my reaction was, the same as my reaction to so much of what you said. Just like, tell me more about that. I want to know more about these unusual things you do.
David, we appreciate it. We're fascinated by him. Stugatz is a bit winded. He's a bit breathless from, if you've been watching on television, he's been juggling dough the entire segment. David, thank you for being on with us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Dave.
We have ridden Stugatz incompetence to world domination.